this point. And when people ask me, what is your favorite wine, I always kind of come back to sparkling wine. So anything with bubbles is kind of my thing. I think that's why I got into beer as well. So it's pretty funny that I have kind of drifted in this direction. So it's not just sparkling wine, but really anything that has bubbles seems to have a lot of appeal to me. So champagne specifically is something that I am very passionate about. So champagne is not only the name of this particular style of wine that has become famous all over the world. This is wine with carbonation in it, so it is a bubbly, sparkling wine, but it is also the name of the region that it comes from. So in the region, they like to say that champagne is only from Champagne. Champagne only comes from Champagne. All champagne is sparkling wine, but not all sparkling wine is champagne. So you can kind of think of the name of the wine as kind of a brand. It can't really be used on anything else in any other part of the world. So you really won't see perfume or paint colors or nail polish or anything with the name champagne, because the folks of the region do come really hard down on other companies that try to use that name, because they like to protect the integrity of that word champagne. But this is a region in the northern part of France. It has a fairly continental climate, meaning that it is cold in the winter and hot in the summer, and has a lot of unique attributes that contribute to the unique flavor of these wines from Champagne. So I like to think of, sometimes when people talk about any sparkling wine, they will use the word champagne, kind of like to think of that as champagne with a small c. But champagne with a big C is the name of the wines from this region, and also the name of the region itself. So, kind of like how we refer to all tissues as Kleenex or something like that. A lot of people refer to all sparkling wine as champagne, but it really should be reserved just for the wines from this particular reason. Hello from Charleston. Good, we have some people who are not necessarily local here. That's fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to share a couple of slides because I've got a great map, and I think it is important to kind of get a visual idea of where we are talking about. So here we see where Champagne is located, not only in France, but also kind of in the world. So here's our map of the world. Our wine growing regions are really just kind of in the central part of, or the northern and southern hemispheres, and Champagne is here in the northern part of France. So it is, it's about 45 minutes by train outside of Paris, and climactically, it's similar to Burgundy, but it is probably the coldest growing region in France. So this cooler climate does contribute to the style of the wine. Champagne has high acidity. It's very bright and refreshing, and cooler climates contribute to this style of wine because the grapes have to struggle a little bit to ripen fully. And the flavors also develop because they are sometimes left on the vine for a little bit longer in order to achieve that full ripeness. Kind of zeroing in on the region here with our map on the left side, we have sort of a central mountainy kind of hilly area that is in the center of the main cities of the region. So Epernay and Reims are the two largest cities within the Champagne region. And these are where we find a lot of the champagne houses, where a lot of the champagne is made and then also stored. So you can kind of think of the vineyards as being a ring around this central hilly area. There's all forests on the top. It's quite beautiful when you visit there. And then within the cities themselves, we have the wineries and these caves that have been dug into the ground, into the clay and the chalky soil of the region. It is based on only 3 main grape varieties. So there are a lot of rules within Champagne that winemakers and grape growers have to follow, again, in order to retain that integrity of the style of wine, and so that more often than not, the wines will have this particular character, almost like a family resemblance between all of the different wines. Right. We have some questions coming in. Map is not showing. Let's see. Can you see it now? Hopefully you're able to see my screen now. So the region is, and the winemaking of the region is different from a lot of other places in France and across the world, because it is really divided into folks who grow the grapes and then folks who make the wines. So we divide this into sort of the wine growing segment, and there are over 16,000 different wine growers within the appellation, and then the wine producers. And a lot of this is based around these large champagne houses, many of which have famous names that you may recognize. So Moet Chandon, Veuve Clicquot, Bollinger, Taittinger, those are all champagne houses. So these are companies, or either family owned or corporate owned, that will buy in grapes from their wine growers that they have longstanding relationships with, and turn those grapes into wine. We also have some other categories, such as cooperatives, where groups of wine growers will get together and sort of pool their resources and make wines. And there are a number of other kind of smaller classifications of either producers or growers. Some make their own, so some wine growers also produce their own wines and will market those, and that is a growing segment of the Champagne market, and has become quite popular with champagne drinkers. So we have a lot of history in the area. And I think because Champagne is such a famous style, you know, everybody knows what Champagne is. There is this perception that it has been around for a really, really long time, but it really hasn't. Sparkling wine from this region of Champagne is really only as old as about the year 1800. So it's really, you know, about the same age as the United States of America. So kind of in the late 17th century was when the sort of the invention of Champagne as a sparkling wine happened. And it was really only able to come into existence once the technology was there for stronger bottles that could withstand the carbonation and the pressure inside the bottle. Because before that, you would put this wine that had carbonation in it into a bottle, and the thinner glass would just explode. So until we had the technological innovations to have stronger glass and appropriate corks to keep that bottle integrity, there really wasn't any consistent sparkling wine. So think about, you know, right around 1800 was when these wines started to really come into full production. And as they say, the rest is history. Let's see if I've got some questions. I guess the map isn't coming through for anybody. Sorry about that. I don't know why my screen is not sharing appropriately. It's below what is visible on the screen. Well, I am sorry for that technical difficulty, everybody. I'm just gonna stop the share then. My apologies. I'm sorry that that didn't come through. All right, so yes, so the history of Champagne and what it is all about really is just, like I said, about 250 years old. Before that, wine was made in the region, but it was mostly still wine. And it was also mostly red wine. So the grape varieties that are used in the region and that go into this style of wine are 2 red grapes and a white grape. And the white grape is Chardonnay, and the red grapes are Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. So you might be thinking, If red wine and red grapes are made in this region, why are the wines usually white? And this is because of the process of making champagne. When the grapes are pressed, they are immediately removed, the juice is immediately removed from the skins. So we don't get any of the color and we don't get any of the tannins in the base wine itself. So we don't have a red wine. We now have a white wine because most of the juice in grapes is actually clear. Right, I'm going to try one more time because people said that they can maybe see my screen again. I'm just going to keep it on this. And let's see. Did anybody, could I get a comment in the chat if people can see my screen? Yay, okay. Everybody can see the map now. All right, so I am not going to go into slideshow mode. I am just going to stay here, and that is fantastic. So again, here we are with our map. So northern France is where Champagne is. We have our close-up map of the region. The different colors here are based on the, I think it's on the, oh, it's kind of hard to see. I'm not really sure. But anyway, it is this geographically defined area within the borders of Champagne. So not only do producers have to use these three main grape varieties, there are a few minor grapes, but overall we are talking about Pinot Noir, Meunier, and Chardonnay. But all of the grapes have to come from this specific special region, and they have to follow certain rules based all sort of dictating all of how the grapes are grown, how they're pruned, how they're picked, and how they are processed. So this process of crushing the grapes and immediately removing the skins from the juice in order to retain or make a white wine is one of the main production rules that have to be followed unless you're making a rosé champagne, but most champagne is white in color. Again, we have over 16,000 wine growers, 370 champagne houses, and about 130 co-ops, which are those groups of growers that kind of pool all of their resources. It's a little bit of our history, starting in the 1800s. And now this is really something that I think makes Champagne different from not only some other sparkling wines throughout the world, but also still table wines. So we start with our grapes from the region. They are pressed, and then that juice, also called must, will settle for a little while, and then alcoholic fermentation will take place. So up to this point in the production method, we end up with a still wine. And once we have that still wine, which is also called the base wine, the next step is where some of the magic starts to happen. Champagne will always be a blended wine. So whether it is a blend of different grape varieties or different vineyards within the Champagne region, or different vintages. So different years of wine will be blended together to make Champagne. And this is one of the things that makes it different from other wines in all over the world, is this blending, but also this reliance on using wines from multiple vintages. So we have the blending step, which is very important to the character and the characteristics of Champagne. And then this is where the magic really happens. This base wine is put into the bottle that you will eventually drink it out of, and it is topped up with a little bit of extra sugar and a little bit of extra yeast. It is then capped with a crown cap, which is the cap that you see on top of a beer bottle, and it is allowed to undergo a second fermentation. So because there is sugar and yeast in the bottle, the yeast eats the sugar and produces a little bit more alcohol, but it also produces carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide bubbles are what gives champagne its sparkle, its carbonation. This aging process will now take quite a while. So 18 months at a minimum, usually a little bit longer than this. That yeast and that wine will sit in that bottle, and the flavors will eventually mature. Those bubbles will get finer, and because it is in an enclosed bottle that has nice strong a nice strong cap, the gas is not allowed to escape, so it redissolves in the wine, and that is how we get our bubble. So the bubble that you have in your glass of champagne when you pop that bottle was created inside that bottle that you just opened. After this step, when the wine is close to being ready to be released to the market, we have some sediment in there, because after the yeast ate that sugar, they died and they settled to the bottom of the bottle. Now, hopefully you can see in this little bit of illustration right here that we have all these green bottles that are laid down kind of side by side and also on top of each other. So the yeast is settled on the longer portion, like the long side of the bottle. We have to get that yeast into the neck of the bottle so that we can release it. So in a process called riddling, which takes, again, a little bit of time, these bottles will eventually be turned so that their neck is facing down. And then the neck of the bottle will be frozen, and that little plug of yeast cells will be I guess, shot out of the bottle so that we now have a clear champagne. It'll be topped up with either a little bit more wine or a little bit more wine plus some sugar in order to give it a little bit of a sweetness, if that is the style that is desired. This is called the dosage. And then it will be corked with our champagne corks, as well as the wire that goes on top of the bottle. It'll be packaged and it will be ready to sell to the market. So this is a much more complicated process than making still wine. And it's one of the reasons why champagne is so expensive, because there is a lot of champagne that is tied up within each of the champagne houses. So the more of these bottles that you have in reserve, that all of your inventory is kind of tied up in the champagne house and has to be sat on for quite a long time. We're talking years here for some of these bottles. That does add to the expense of the wine, because there's so much inventory that is just sort of being sat on. I'm going to stop sharing. And all right. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on is what makes Champagne unique to this region. Why this style of wine from this one particular place? Why is this more famous and more sought after than other sparkling wines from other parts of the world? And I think it comes down to 4 factors. It comes down to the specific grape varieties that are used, which gives it its unique flavor, not only kind of the fruits and the flowers and things that you'll taste in there, but also the structure of the wine, so the level of acidity that it has, in addition to this ability to have this beautiful effervescence and to age particularly well. It comes down to the soil of the region, which in most places is a combination of chalk or clay or some sandy soils. So planting these grape varieties in the soil types that they like best also gives our champagnes their unique flavors. The climate of the region is also very important. So because it is this cooler climate that allows for a long, slow maturation of the grapes, but doesn't let them ripen to have too much sugar in them. So it's more that we have these really delightful fruit flavors, but without too much sugar, and this really beautiful level of acidity that gives us that refreshing, mouth-watering quality is also very important to the style of champagne, and is Often why you find other sparkling wines being made in other parts of the world in as cool of a climate as you can, because this style is so sought after. So the climate is very important. And then finally, this process of production that I just walked us through. So this ability to have that second fermentation, that carbonation go on within the bottle, but then also the aging process of that bottle develops unique flavors and characteristics within the wine. And there are other sparkling wines made in other parts of the world that don't taste the same because they aren't hitting all of these factors. So it's, you know, not only these four unique things to the region, but it's also the people in the region as well. So a lot of the champagne makers as well as grape growers, these professions have been in their families for generations. So we see a lot of institutional knowledge being passed down, not only within the same companies, but also within the same families. So you really can't overlook, I think, that those traditions and you know, the ways of making champagne and just knowing what is going on in the vineyard from year to year to year to year, that that knowledge gets to be passed down. So some other sparkling wines from other parts of the world that are also incredibly good, but are also different from champagne. We have cava from Spain, which, while it uses the same process as champagne does, doesn't necessarily always use the same grape varieties. So sometimes you will see some Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in cava, but it's mostly based on indigenous Spanish varieties. So while we have the process being the same, the flavors from the grapes are different. So that is one of the real big differentiating factors between cava and champagne. A lot of cava is not aged as long as champagne is as well, so it doesn't develop those kind of toasty, brioche, yeasty kind of notes that champagne has. Soil and climate all over the world are different. So if you have sparkling wine from California, for example, it might not necessarily be grown in these chalky soils, and it's a much warmer growing climate in California. So even some of the cooler places in California that are known for their sparkling wine still get a little bit warmer than we usually do in Champagne. We also have, you know, these styles of wine from northern Italy. Franciacorta is made in the same style as Champagne, but again, different soils, different climates, things like that. And then finally, I think probably the second most famous sparkling wine in the world is also from northern Italy, and it is Prosecco. And a lot of people love Prosecco. I also love Prosecco, just me and my sparkling wine thing. But the production method for Prosecco is very different from Champagne. So instead of that secondary fermentation happening in the bottle, it actually happens in a big tank. And it doesn't take as long to produce, and is also made from a different grape variety. So the flavors of Champagne and Prosecco are actually very, very different from each other. Champagne is, you know, like I said, kind of toasty and yeasty, whereas Prosecco tends to be lighter, fruitier, sometimes a little sweeter. It doesn't necessarily cost as much because the production doesn't take as long. It's not as labor intensive. There's just a lot of sort of, I don't want to say simplification going into Prosecco, but it is a very different method of production. So it does have very different flavors than we have for our champagnes. So I wanted to ask if anybody has any burning questions about Champagne, and if you want to put them in the Q&A, I would be happy to answer them. And I also have some of my own questions that people have, you know, asked me over time about that I can certainly hit on as well. So please send in your questions and I will answer them as they come up. But one of the first things that I wanted to kind of touch on that I get asked a lot, and I've talked about it a little bit, is why is champagne so expensive? So I did talk a little bit about how so much of the inventory is kind of wrapped up at the houses. There's also a lot of these, so many of these regulations and rules that have to be followed are also fairly expensive and labor intensive. So that's another reason why champagne can be so expensive. But also, you know, as I hate to call champagne a brand, but as a brand, you know, this is a style of wine that is world famous. It has this, you know, cachet. I feel like it's the kind of thing that people are willing to pay top dollar for, and because the demand is there, it can be, you know, can be charged whatever the market can can sustain, I suppose. Okay, great question. Does riddling have to be done by hand? No. So this process of what we call riddling, which is eventually moving all of the sediment into the neck of the bottle, was originally done by hand. So this was invented by the famous Veuve Clicquot, the widow Clicquot, in the early 1800s. She developed this method of getting the sediments down, the sediment into the neck of the bottle. And this was done by hand until the mid 20th century, when a couple of guys invented something called a gyropellet, which kind of looks like a Borg spaceship. It's this big cube that you load your bottles into, and every 20 minutes or so, it gives the bottles a little shake and then it turns a little bit. So eventually all of the bottles are facing neck down, and then you can go about getting rid of the sediment through the process of disgorgement. But there are still some champagnes that are riddled by hand. I believe Dom Perignon still is. Some of the larger bottles, larger format bottles have to be. I am drinking my cup of tea from my fancy teacup that has all of the different sizes of bottles that you can get champagne in, because they do come in a whole variety of sizes. So some of these larger ones have to be riddled by hand because they don't fit in the gyropellet. So sometimes you do see some of the specialty bottles still riddled by hand. So that was a fabulous question. Second question, what are my thoughts on Cremant? So Cremant is another style of sparkling wine that comes from France. So I say that it's, if you make sparkling wine any place in France other than in Champagne, you call it Cremant. I personally really like Cremant. What I think is very nice about it is that it focuses on the particular grape varieties that different regions specialize in. So for example, one of my favorite Cremants is from Alsace. And in Alsace, they grow a lot of Riesling and a lot of Pinot Noir for their rosé and red wines. And Cremant from Alsace, especially their rosés, are all made from Pinot Noir. So it really, if you, if you talk about a sense of place, we call it terroir in wine, that sort of flavor of a particular place, you really get more of an understanding of and a taste of the terroir from these particular regions, because they're making their sparkling wines out of the grapes that they grow best. So Pinot Noir from Alsace, you get a lot of Cremant made from Chenin Blanc in the Loire Valley. From Bordeaux, they make it either from Merlot or Sauvignon Blanc, any of the grape varieties that grow in those particular regions. So Cremant is nice because it really, gives you a good bottle of sparkling wine that's not crazy expensive. Most of them are somewhere between, $15 and $30 a bottle, as opposed to Champagne, which can start at 30 and kind of go up from there. And really gives you a unique wine from those particular regions. So thumbs up to Cremant. I had another question about German or Australian sect. I wonder if that was meant to be Austrian sect. And how would I compare them to Champagne? So German sect, there are some styles that are made in the Champagne method and the traditional method, like they use in Champagne, and others that are made in the Charmat method, the tank method, like Prosecco is made. So there are different styles of it out there. I think what is interesting and unique about sect is that usually it's made from Riesling. So because Riesling has such different flavors and different aromatics than Pinot Noir and Chardonnay have, you really get a different flavor and a whole different like aroma profile from those wines. So they can often have a very similar bubble to them, but you don't get the same flavors of sort of toast and yeastiness that you do get in Champagne, because the whole production process really affects the wine differently when it's made from the Riesling grape. So they are delicious, just kind of different in flavor than I would say from Champagne. But really cool questions, everybody. All right, so I have, looks like a very detailed question. How would you describe the differences between the growing regions or crus within Champagne? And are certain areas known for different styles of Champagne or soil types? Yes, so the different regions within Champagne are based upon what their soil types are. And then the correct grape variety is matched to that soil type. So there are some subregions that specialize just in Pinot Noir. There are some other subregions specialized just in Chardonnay. And we get different styles of champagnes if they are made from grapes that are from just those specific regions. So what I was saying before about Champagne being a blended wine, often what we see is that there will be some Chardonnay from this particular area that is part of the blend that will give, an appley or a floral or fruity component. And it would be blended with Pinot Noir grown from another part of the region, which would give it some structure and some other characteristics that Pinot Noir brings to the party. So when a champagne house is trying to produce kind of a consistent style from bottle to bottle to bottle, this bottling, the blending, that takes place uses all of these different components in order to make this kind of consistent style. But if a producer is trying to focus in on those unique characteristics of those regions, then yes, they might make a 100% Chardonnay from some of these regions that specialize in Chardonnay to really focus on what that particular grape variety can create in its own champagne. So we do see these all the time. So we have a certain style of champagne called Blanc de Blanc, which literally means white from white. So white wine made from white grapes. And those will be made with 100% Chardonnay because Chardonnay is the main white grape variety from the region. On the flip side of that, we can have Blanc de Noir, so white wines made from red grapes. They would be either all Pinot Noir or a blend of Pinot Noir and Meunier. And that would be highlighting those characteristics of that red grape variety without necessarily having a red wine. So, in color, the Blanc de Noir is almost like a little more kind of rose gold-ish, and just will have a different style of the wine. Can I elaborate on the time frame of aging in the bottle on the lees before getting released? When it says minimum 36 months, how much of that is on the lees and how much is in the bottle? So depending on the style of the champagne, it is it could be a whole length of different time frames in the bottle. So it's usually minimum 18 months sitting on the lees, so sitting on those yeast cells, which continue to change the flavor of the wine. But for many champagnes, it is much longer than that. It can be years sitting on the lees. I had one the last time that I was there that had been on the lees since, I believe, 2002. So it was almost 20 years sitting on the lees. So there are some wines that can spend, years or even decades sitting in that bottle in contact with those yeasts. And there are benefits to doing that. So the yeast cells in that bottle will continue to sort of scavenge oxygen from whatever might be remaining in the bottle. So it actually keeps the wine fresher. It keeps it from tasting old. So it will change the flavors, but it also keeps it kind of tasting young. So one of the reasons that they would keep the wines on the lees for an extended amount of time is so that when it is released to the market, it still has that kind of young, fresh flavor to it, instead of being aged in the bottle after it's already been corked with your champagne cork, does start to oxidize and starts to begin that aging process in the bottle. Essentially, how much time from the moment it goes into the bottle to the end? Yeah, so years, anywhere from say 2 to 3 years up to decades. It really does depend on the wine and the style that the winemaker is trying to make. So there's a whole host of time frames that you could be looking at. What is the correct pronunciation of the capital city of Champagne? It's pronounced R-E-I-M-S, but it's usually pronounced Reims. So Reims is the correct way to pronounce that, not Reims. There are a couple of us testing for certified sommelier soon online with you. Any memorization ideas for the main regions? My big one is the Côte d'Ivoire. In the Côte d'Ivoire, they grow Pinot Noir. Hopefully that could be helpful for you. There are a couple of other ones that if you want to shoot me an email afterwards, I can see if I can send them on to you to help remember. Yeah, memorization for exams sometimes is no fun, and it is good to have some mnemonic devices to remember. I don't really have too many for Champagne, unfortunately. When a champagne is aged on its fine lees, does that happen before the secondary fermentation, riddling, disgorging? So the way that, yeah, those lees happen, it is during the secondary fermentation, but those lees develop because of the secondary fermentation. So it happens after the process of that secondary fermentation. So the fermentation takes place. You now no longer have any sugar left in the wine. So the yeast has nothing else to eat. So that's why it dies and why it settles to the bottom. And then that is the point where the wine will then age on those lees. And then riddling and disgorging will take place, like I just said, anywhere from 18 months to years after that takes place. With all the uprisings back in the day, do Aube champagnes stand up to the more known areas? And is the style significantly different than they were further south? Not really anymore. That was more of an issue kind of 100 years ago, but there's really not as much conversation anymore about some of the subregions that were added after the fact. When they were demarcating the region of Champagne. So less of an issue these days. And I think it was more that the region just kind of had to find its own, figuring out what grapes grow best in what particular areas, and then having those styles be integrated into the final styles of Champagne. And one of the really interesting things I think about the region is that they are so is united the right word? There's a lot of consensus of doing things within the region for the benefit of the region and making sure that the reputation of the region is always held to a really high standard. So the grape growers are held to a high standard, the producers are held to a high standard, and kind of raising up the quality of the wine and keeping it consistent by everybody kind of doing their part. So there really is this feeling in the area that everybody has a hand in making Champagne the kind of the best that it can be, and everybody kind of works together for that. So I think that is a kind of a good inspirational thing about the region, is that all the growers, all the producers, as well as the folks who are doing education and out there marketing the stuff, really are all on the same page and just trying to do what is best for the region. How do you pronounce the prestige cuvée for Taittinger? Comte, I think is what that question is asking. Comte. Not sure exactly what you're asking there. It's C-O-M-T-E-S. So Comte is how we would pronounce that. So another question, we have more in the Q&A over here. So another question that I get often is, why do I get a headache when I drink Champagne but not other wines? And there are some people out there who really just don't like champagne. There's a wine out there for everyone. So if you don't like champagne, don't drink it. But I have a feeling that if you're watching this video, you do like champagne. But I think it is true that sparkling wine and maybe champagne specifically are a little bit more likely to give you a headache. And there are a couple of reasons for this. It's not the sulfites. Most people do not have a sulfite allergy that results in headaches. But because the wine has carbonation to it, when you drink a carbonated alcoholic beverage, the alcohol actually gets into your system faster because of how the bubbles are interacting with your digestive system. So because the alcohol can enter your system faster, you don't have, your liver doesn't, in your stomach, don't have time to process the alcohol because it goes right into your bloodstream. So you can get kind of a, a bigger alcoholic hit and quicker, which I think can lead to people having a little bit more of a headache. There is also a lot going on with the extended contact of the lees and the wine, in addition to just other chemical changes that happen in alcoholic beverages and in wine in particular. So there are changes that happen to the juice when it is fermented that produces additional amino acids and histamines, which also can result in people having headaches. So those, I think, are the two main reasons why sometimes people get a little bit more of a headache when they drink sparkling wine. So I would say my recommendation, as it is with really all alcoholic beverages, that if you want to drink responsibly, which you should, drink water when you are drinking alcoholic beverages, but also make sure that you have enough food in your system, and specifically protein, because that will help you process the alcohol and hopefully keep you from getting too much of a headache. I see. Comte de Champagne is how we say the special cuvee from Taittinger. Wow, enters the system faster. Yes, definitely, it definitely does. And the same, but the same would be true for any other sparkling wine. So that's not a specific to champagne, but that's kind of a sparkling wine overall kind of a thing. Why does all champagne taste the same to me? I like this question. It is true that there is much less variability, I would say, from one champagne to another. Champagne is a very nuanced type of wine, style of wine. In some ways, it's like red Burgundy in that regard, in that you can have Burgundies from all over the region, but if you haven't tasted a lot of them, it's going to be really hard for you to really put your finger on what is different from one another. So champagne is very similar to that, I feel, in that if you have a glass of champagne twice a year, chances are they're all going to taste the same to you because you just don't have the experience of being able to build up your sensory memory of what different champagnes are all about. So this is one of the reasons why I feel like if you want to really know about champagne, it is very helpful to taste a bunch of them side by side. And this is one of the reasons for doing champagne education. So I teach the Champagne Specialist course here at Commonwealth Wine School. We are one of only 2 schools in the country right now that teach it. And what is really fabulous about it is that it really gets you to focus on all of the ins and outs of the region, but it's of the region as a whole. So we don't necessarily focus on this is what Veuve Clicquot tastes like, this is what Bollinger tastes like, this is what Moet tastes like. It's more like this is what it tastes like when your champagne is based more on white grapes versus red grapes. Or this is what, chalky soil brings to the party, or this is how to tell the difference between an extra dry and a brut champagne. So it really gets you focused on tasting different champagnes side by side and then being able to figure out what makes them different and being able to put words to those differences. So I would say for anyone who especially is in the wine industry, whether you are working the floor at a restaurant or whether you are retail or wholesale, having more of this champagne knowledge can be very, very beneficial to you as a wine professional, because you'll be able to sell the bottles a little bit better with having that little bit of extra knowledge, and hopefully be able to, increase your revenue, make a little bit more money in your job. It also makes you look really impressive when you know these things. So it's one of the things that I am most proud to teach, because not only is it fun, because heck, this is champagne. This is a lot of fun. It tastes delicious, and it is an area that I think you really do need to taste multiple things side by side in order to really understand what's going on. Question from Nina. Can you simplify the special club and how that came about and how that has influenced champagne? How important is this to a working somm? Special club. Can you clarify what you mean by club? And I will get back to that question. And then another one was Grand Crus. What meaning unique characteristics or even non-Grand Cru. So what do I like about champagne? So just a quick note on the crus of champagne. So there are some special areas that are considered to be a little bit higher quality. In the past, these Grand Crus of champagne were used to determine the price of the wine in the area. They would be set based on how much the grapes from these special areas were costing. That has been thrown out the window. About 20 years ago, they got rid of that system. So the Grand Crus are a little bit less, I think they're a little bit less important these days, but wineries that do use grapes from those particular areas do still put it on the label. So it adds a little bit of, I think, cachet to a bottle of champagne. I am particularly fond of Blanc de Blanc champagnes. I feel like Blanc de Blanc are in my opinion, the best expression of Chardonnay anywhere in the world. Chardonnay is not my favorite grape variety, but I absolutely love Blanc de Blanc champagne. If I was stranded on a desert island and could only have one bottle of wine, that's what it would be for me. I like that kind of appley note. I like the toastiness. I just think that there's something really, really beautiful about that grape variety coming from champagne. What's the schedule for your champagne class in the future? So we have one starting early September. So it's 4 classes and then an exam on week 5. And every week we touch on a different aspect of the region. So one class is completely dedicated to winemaking. Another one we talk a lot about food and wine pairings, things like that. Okay. The Special Club Prestige Cuvée with the 28 grower producers who share the same bottle shape. I actually don't know anything about that, but I can do some research and get back to you about that. What else do we have for questions? Okay. And we also have access to the slides from today. So I am not allowed to share those slides from today. Those are proprietary from the Comité Champagne. So I do share them when I have you enrolled in my class. They're actually part of the workbook that you get when you enroll in Champagne Specialist. But unfortunately, I can't just send them around to everybody. So apologies for not being able to do that. Let's see. So I think I'm just going to touch on one other thing, and that is some of the famous names that you see sometimes on champagne bottles or in champagne. And the first off, kind of the granddaddy is Dom Perignon. A lot of people think that Dom Perignon invented champagne. That is not actually true. Sparkling wines were made for hundreds of years before Dom Perignon came on the scene, but he did have a few innovations that helped make the industry and the style of wine what it is. Classes after October, yes. So I am hoping to do an intensive champagne specialist in hopefully January. I'm thinking probably a weekend in late January at this point, where we would all do a couple of days together. We'll have an intensive weekend here at the wine school in Cambridge, taste a lot of champagne together, make some new friends. It's really a wonderful cohort to be a part of, because everybody is very enthusiastic when it comes to tasting and learning about champagne. So thank you for that question, Steve. Yes, so Dom Perignon was a monk in the late 1700s. He revolutionized the region by understanding that in order to retain the bubble in the bottle, you needed stronger glass. So one of his innovations was using stronger coal-fired glass, which made for a thicker bottle, and also the cork. So having the special cork and the special bottle are innovations that are attributed to Dom Perignon, in addition to helping revolutionize the idea of blending. So blending different grape varieties from different parts of the region, and also focusing on Pinot Noir and Chardonnay specifically. Another question just popped up. Is it just lore, or is it true that the wire cage always has a specific number of twists to unwind? It is true. 6 twists will get the cage off of your bottle of champagne. And this is pretty true for sparkling wine all over the world. I don't think I have ever had a bottle of Prosecco or Cava or sparkling wine from anywhere else that is more or fewer than 6 twists. So when you are opening your bottle of sparkling wine, make sure you keep your hand or your thumb or a towel or something on top of that bottle as you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then pop out the cork. Yeah, it's funny. It's right. Keep your thumb on it at all times. Once you start untwisting that cage, you must protect it, because there's always the possibility that that cork will shoot out of the bottle and injure you or somebody else, or break a lamp. So yes, care. Take care when you are opening a bottle of champagne or other sparkling wine. Another famous name to know is Veuve Clicquot, she of the bright orange wine label. She is rightly credited with a number of innovations for champagne that are held and kept to today, really helping make the wine and the region what it is. One of her first innovations, same as Dom Perignon, was this idea of blending. Before the late 1700s, champagne was mostly still red wine or still pink wine. And even the sparkling wines still had a lot of the kind of pink color to them, because of the process of removing the juice from the skins immediately wasn't really a common thing to be done. So what she focused a lot on was this idea of blending, but she is also credited with inventing riddling. So the very first riddling table was made by her. She drilled a bunch of holes in her kitchen table and moved the table around so that eventually those bottles could sit in the holes in the table and go neck down, so that she could remove the sediment from the bottle. So this idea of making a non-cloudy sparkling champagne was one of her innovations as well. So the whole riddling, disgorgement, that was all from Veuve Clicquot. And she was a master marketer as well. So she introduced champagne to the Russian royal family, and it really took off in that part of the world, and made her very famous. And we have some other famous names from the region that did that same thing, but in other parts of the world. So Louise Pommery is credited with doing kind of the same kind of thing, but in England, changed the style more for an English palate as opposed to a Russian palate. And other people, did other things for other parts of the world as well. So we have, a lot of famous names that are now still either the name of particular houses in the region, or they have their name on specialty bottles of champagne. All right, so we are just about, how the heck do they freeze the neck? Great question. So the necks of the bottles are run through like a super low temperature, I think it's like a glycol solution. It's something like negative 27 degrees Celsius. So it's wicked, wicked cold, and it freezes all of the junk in the neck of the bottle and a little bit of the wine, so that when this is mostly done by machine these days. It's not usually done by hand. When that plug of stuff gets disgorged from the bottle, it is fully solidly frozen. And then the bottle can be topped up with a little bit more wine and a little bit more sugar for the dosage to balance out whatever the sweetness level is. So yeah, before that innovation came about, and I'm not exactly sure when that happened, sometime in the 20th century, it was all done by hand. And there are some producers that still do a lot of it by hand, and especially smaller producers. I've seen a couple of sparkling wine producers here in the United States that do it all by hand. That they will, freeze the neck, and then they have a machine that they kind of, use a popping, a popping machine that will take the cork off, and that little plug, not the cork, the cap, and that plug will come out, and then they follow the process. How do they control how much wine they're losing in the process to ensure consistency and quality? I think it's just gotten to be that over time, because the bottle is at a particular temperature, and they know that when they disgorge the cap, that only a certain amount comes out of the bottle at any particular time, because everything in that particular batch is consistent. So they kind of always know how much is gonna come. All right, everybody. Well, that is our time, and that was a very quick 1 hour. Thank you all for participating and all your questions. It's really, really wonderful when I have lots of questions thrown at me, because I never really know what you want to know. So, so thank you very much for telling me what your burning questions about champagne are. Go out and drink some bubbles. I am getting together with my first cohort of champagne specialists tonight, because we are a social group and we get together all the time. So I hope I see some of you in future classes, and enjoy